So, a really fascinating area of inquiry that has been very rich for me over the past many years is about the seeming separation between expressivity and technique. And this takes so many different forms. On the one hand, we can see great performers of various kinds, or or anybody, somebody who's really technically masterful, and yet just doesn't do anything here. So that's one manifestation of this, and another is like how we practice, like drilling techniques, like, and just kind of phoning it in. Maybe, okay, I'm just playing the scale, but really my mind's elsewhere. Like, and when that happens, what I think is happening is well, like how you practice becomes how you perform, and so you're practicing a kind of performance that's disconnected here from the inner audience member, from the source of like what is alive inside you. And I believe that's where all the problems of performance come about. Um, One of my biggest critiques of music education and other artistic forms of education, but really it's everywhere. You look at math, the way that math is taught, it's so boring. It's so boring.
Every once in a while, you get a good teacher,
Every
but
once in a while. What would make it really interesting is like teaching the history of math. Like, why did this form of equation come into existence? Like, why bother? It's never taught. But if you realize like, oh, like math was like this, 1,000 years ago, but then certain people were trying to figure out this problem, then all of a sudden they're like your curiosity and engagement is there. It's like, oh, this makes sense
right,
to what I want to do in the world. Maybe you never want to, actually need to actually graph the area of the space underneath the curve, but at least you know why somebody might do that. It might be the same for a particular dance move or something in acting or like staccato, like we were just talking about. Um, Technique divorced from soul, divorced from heart, um, is an impediment to mastery.
I also the separation between the two was just kind of normal, and
Yeah,
I always heard like learn your technique, practice your scales, practice your etudes, and
yeah,
then or like drill the left hand to know the notes of the piece,
yeah,
and then later once you can play the piece, adding on
yeah.
the
Right.
expressiveness rather than it took me until pretty much later, maybe like trying to remember the first time I heard the opposite. Probably like late high school at
Mm,
least.
yeah,
When I started hearing or maybe even master classes of people starting to describe like playing your scales with expression or um
yeah,
tickle in my throat.
yeah,
Um what was I saying? Oh yeah, as soon as you start learning a piece, even like, studying how you want to express it before you physically start learning the technique of it.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
It's funny what just came up. Part of my book is about climate change, and I have a critique about sustainability, the idea of sustainability in the book. And so, one way that sustainability as a concept shows up in our culture these days is like a UPS truck that still runs on diesel, but it's just like a little bit more efficient. And they put a green sticker on it, a little leaf that says eco
oh yeah,
friendly. It's like, no, it's not.
it's like I saw I think it was a Coca-Cola truck or something, and it's
Yeah.
like our car or truck is harsh is a hybrid or something
Yeah.
like that. It's like,
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah. I mean, okay, great on one hand. It's like
But it's
that
like
kind
the entire outside of the truck was dedicated to advertising that it
of
was hybrid.
right. Right. And so the critique is like, what are we trying to sustain? Are we trying to sustain more of this way of life that's actually destroying the planet and just have like a thin veneer of sustainability on top of it? Or, except I personally, I don't really want the kind of soul crushing way of life that we live where like separation thinking is everywhere. I don't really want that to continue. I want a rich, beautiful life where our economic activity, instead of like destroying the planet, enriches the planet. So it's a whole new way of being, like from the ground up. And there's an analogy here to like learning music or other performance arts, or any kind of technique, like even with painting. And it, I have a very simple way into that. So I was describing earlier that my friend Aaron was teaching a class on music theory. This is another area where it can be incredibly abstract, like a Neapolitan chord to a something or other. It's like, wait, that's the 1 4 6. It's just a bunch of numbers that can be very disembodied. Now, it's not always taught that way, but it often is. You get this workbook filled with abstract formulas, basically, about chords and scales and whatnot. And the thing that is missing is the embodied reality. Like arts are about um, making your inner audience member happy, something like that, in various ways, remaining connected. And so, what the way he taught interval training to his high school students was like, here's a minor third. Notice how that feels in your body. Here's a major third. Notice how that feels in your body. Here's a tritone. Here's, the melodic minor. Notice how that feels in your body as you listen to it. And so then you get this visceral sense that the connection to your heart and soul is like there from the get-go. You do the scale, you play it, like every note you're listening here. It's not terribly expressive or exciting. It doesn't really need to be, but by including this act of listening to yourself as you learn basic techniques, you get the why of the technique right off the bat. And that will only help. Yeah, in lots of different ways.
Yeah, and even like just thinking, like imagining playing a scale, how the different notes will ring differently on
Yeah.
violin naturally just because of how the
Mm-hmm.
instrument is.
Mm-hmm.
But I do enjoy like when I take the time to play a slow scale and notice which notes resonate more, and which ones just I don't know how to really explain it, but you feel the vibrations
Mm-hmm.
and you also just kind of connect more with the instrument, that like you're making the sound rather than the instrument is making the sound, if that makes sense.
What do you mean?
How to explain this?
Or what does that offer you?
Like
What does it offer you when you're making the sound in that way?
it just connects me more to the instrument. Like I'm not trying to like figure out how to force my violin to make the sound or
There you
something
go.
like that. Like I'm not like trying to tame the violin,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
more so just kind
She
of,
is wild, cannot be tamed.
yeah, just getting a sense of like if as if it was my own voice.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's how playing from the heart feels. But Yehudi Menuhin said it so well. Playing violin is like singing through your arms.
And your fingers, I guess.
um, the way it feels for me sometimes is almost like there's this projection coming out of my heart. It's like I came up with an image for this yesterday, where you almost imagine like when you're playing, like, as you're listening to the sound, it's like you're that like can imagine that sound is being beamed like to a radio in your heart, and the speaker of the radio doesn't play a sound, but it plays whatever you're feeling in there. And as you're playing, you notice to whatever is coming out of the heart speaker. And so it's a way of remaining like connected moment by moment to yeah that which is alive inside you while you play. That to me is like the whole thing, the whole thing, playing from the heart. It's like, one of the things that happens when we're drilling techniques and etudes is that we have this static idea in our minds. And when we have a static idea of what something should sound like, then our bodies get tighter. We have more of a static, robotic, mechanical kind of movement. And it sounds mechanical and static. And there's a disconnection here. You've heard this so many times, I'm sure. Somebody's playing and it sounds like they're trying to get the notes right.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, and you
Like,
can tell when
you can
someone's
totally tell.
focusing on every single individual note.
Right. Right. And this is not making music. This is acquiring a skill. It's a different thing. Making music happens when, instead of paying attention to something static or trying to make something static, you pay attention to that which is alive inside you. Listening to your heart as you play. Like, how does your heart want this to go? What wish or intention and you'll feel it. You'll feel it in your body. How does your heart want to have for this? Or like, what's the impact of playing it this way or that way? What happens when you make a mistake, or when something goes unexpectedly well? Do you get more open, more closed in the inner audience member? Have we ever gone through this?
The inner audience member?
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that also just kind of made me think about a lot of my performance anxiety presentations when performing. Part of it is noticing how you feel, like say if you make a mistake, or even just like noticing how you feel when you walk on stage or before the performance, because you can't really figure out what to do unless you listen to yourself first, to know like if you never realize that when you make a mistake you tighten up,
Yeah.
and there's no way that you could ever know like how to counteract that.
Yeah. Yeah. So that paying attention. Well, it's called mindfulness. It's actually noticing what's going on in your life. Yeah.
For a lot of with my students, if they get through a whole piece, I'll have them run through the piece, and then afterwards just immediately ask them, well, what went right? What did you find enjoyable? What did you kind of cringe at? And it's always interesting to see. Some students get really into it and like give me this whole list of things, while others are like, it was pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great though that you're asking that. Like, what do you notice is one of the most powerful tools that we as teachers have.
I remember my freshman year of college, my professor would. I felt like I was always playing a spot the difference type of game, because I would play something, and he would say, "Well, what do you notice is going on in your bow arm or something?" And I would think, "I don't know. It feels normal." And then he would play it, and you could see that there is something different.
Yeah.
and like sense, and like you could hear a
Yeah.
difference,
Yeah.
but it was like a spot the different game where you couldn't
Mm-hmm.
quite
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a powerful way of teaching, because again, if actually a really big part of what we do is helping our students think for themselves, helping them discover what's going on for themselves. And because if they don't notice what's actually happening, they don't have a chance of helping themselves ever.
Mhm.
They can't actually make a change. Yeah, so that's a very powerful inquiry.
I feel like I had something on the tip of my tongue, but I lost it at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
It was something else that had to do with my performance anxiety
Mm.
presentations.
Mm. Yeah, you were talking about tension when you make mistakes, when you go out on stage.
I don't think this was it, but we can kind of go off of this.
Sure.
I like to do practice performances, and I
Mm.
would do that at my college before like a recital. Like our recitals would have multiple, like one person playing each piece kind of thing. And I would like to have those practice performances, or even before juries, at the end of the semester. And I have people play just to mostly practice playing in front of other people, but then afterwards still asking like, what did you notice, or what
Mm-hmm.
did you feel
Mm-hmm.
during this? And then we
Mm-hmm.
could even done where the audience would purposefully make distractions,
Mm-hmm.
like the obnoxious ones, like a door slamming or a phone
Mm-hmm.
going off, like the worst
Yeah.
things that could
Yeah.
probably happen during your performance. And then again, asking like what they felt when, like, for each distraction, if one triggered something
Mm.
more, is more distracting than another thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's
And
great.
that way, when you hear it, you can notice it faster and not kind of just dwell
Mm.
on it for a couple of measures.
That's right. That's right. So you teach this to your students that way?
Yeah, I did that for like practice run throughs at
Mm.
college.
Mm.
I haven't really had any of those because I never get all my students at
Yeah.
one place.
Yeah.
But now that I have a space, maybe I'll start doing that, because I know
Mm.
my private teacher throughout high school would do things like that.
Yeah. 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 Oh, I got a couple different things in mind. Um, well, I have so much to say about playing from the heart and how to teach that.
Yeah.
Um, I'm also just kind of curious, like, where is your curiosity in terms of teaching these days?
Oh, I get a lot of questions from parents,
Mm.
uh, and this is a good, reasonable question:
Mm.
how to get their kid to practice more,
Oh
and
yeah.
how to not just motivate them with like a sticker chart,
Hmm.
or you'll
Oh
get a
no,
piece of
the
candy
stainless
at the
steel
end of the
ruler.
week, or yeah, or like threat of some sort if you don't
Yeah.
practice, then so
Yeah.
and so's off.
Yeah.
Like, what are more inner ways to motivate?
That's the question. External motivation, helps to some degree, but can also be a form of manipulation or threat of punishment. Even promise of reward can be a form of manipulation. Um, yeah, conditional love. Like if you do this, you'll be a good boy or girl.
Hmm.
Um, make mommy or daddy happy. That's actually pretty terrifying for children, and not a very good motivator. So yeah, this is like the constant question, and I do have a few things to say about it. Um, so hmm, it, I believe that there's like this is a kid who doesn't want to practice. Like, it's like there's not anything wrong with that kid. There's you got to want to
Mhm.
at some level, and for like really young kids, it especially, I mean, it's for anybody really, but especially for young kids, it's got to be fun. It's got to be fun. And so what I typically do is just try to make everything into a game.
Yeah, I have a lot of. I'll call things a game that really aren't, but like in like kind of make it a game, you know.
Yeah. And for okay, so and it's different for different kids, different developmental levels. Like for really young kids, 5, 6, something like that. um I have a couple different, yeah, so like one thing is like gamifying things. um the other thing, like what you mentioned earlier, is pointing out what's working well. So I'll talk about both of those things. So gamifying things, like for really young kids, you do the tiny special spot that they have, those couple of notes, getting that string crossing, and then you make up a funny movement. Wow! And then you do it again, and then you make up a different funny movement, and then you do it again, and then you do a different. It sort of, it doesn't have to be at all related to music. It's just something fun to do in between repetitions. Repetition is boring.
Yeah.
All right, gets old real fast. And yet we need a lot of repetition in order to get really good at what we do. So, especially for the little kids, any way of making the repetition more fun, you get out your building blocks. And every time you get the spot right, you get to put another building block up. Or I have some dominoes. And in the lessons, the kids can take one of these big dominoes, and every time they do something well, I point that out. Hey, I noticed on this note you had such a clear sound. That was amazing. Why don't you give yourself a domino? And they line up their dominoes, and at the end of the lesson, that's so much fun. It's not related to music,
Yeah, I could see how that would be fun too.
but
One of my
yeah.
students, she started bringing one of those poppet things, and anytime we get through, like all of our pieces are like 1 line, 2 lines max,
Mm-hmm.
and if we get through and we finish a piece, and she does really well, then she pops a whole row of the poppet things.
Okay. Great. Yeah, exactly. So some
She
kind
loves
of
doing that.
fun little reward. Or if you have a kid who's super hyper, they do the thing, run across the room, run back. They do the thing, run around the house, run back. Something like that. Um, yeah, and for like one of the actually the most powerful practicing tools that I've been using these days has to do with improv. I call it holographic practicing. Do you know what a hologram is?
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's an image that's made kind of like a fractal. Like each part of the image negative contains a little piece of the whole. So you can take away part of it, and the image remains whole. And what I like to do, is like where there's a particular note set in a tricky spot. This is where the student is always tripping up. Like the boring way, the way that you're gonna have to fight the kid to practice enough times, is just to do the thing. Okay, 10 times. You better get it right. Right? There's no way that a kid is gonna want to do that. But and actually I don't find that it works that well. Just like if you move to a new neighborhood, if you only take one path to the grocery store every time, then you're not going to learn the neighborhood very well. If you ever get lost, If you ever, take a wrong turn, then you're completely lost. It's fragile to have only one way of doing something. And it tends to make your body tighter too. It's like there's that same drilling thing. And so what I like to do with that spot, we'll play the notes of the spot out of order, lowest to highest, highest to lowest, make like a little scale out of it. Okay. Then once they get used to playing the scale from the lowest note to the highest note, just, whole notes, whatever, then we'll say, oh, well, let's improvise using only these notes. Then we take turns. So I'll make up a little song based on those notes. Simple, musical, doesn't have to be anything fancy, doesn't have to be creative. It's just a small musical phrase based on those notes. Okay, and then the student does that, right? We take a bunch of turns back and forth, and maybe there's a tricky rhythm that's in there. So we'll add that rhythm in there after a little bit. Or maybe there's another technique in there, like a string crossing. Okay, so do your improvisation, but this time do a string crossing somewhere.
Mm.
But this time, put some uppo staccato in there somewhere. And even if you're doing this with a piece the student has never played, I've done that for like a tricky section. They've never even played from A to B. They get it first time.
Just by using those notes and doing random things.
Yeah.
That's
And
interesting.
this is how it relates to the hologram. It's like it creates this distributed field of possibilities. Maybe it's kind of like quantum in that way, like a quantum superposition. You could, I mean, you know it inside and out that way. You could do it in any order. And the way that it's written is just one possibility. You've already done it, a dozen different ways. This is just one way of doing it. So it feels really easy. There isn't this big pressure. Oh, got to get it right. Plus, it's a lot more fun. This is a
Right.
lot more fun for kids to do.
Going off with what you said about rhythms, this is how I originally learned it, and now I teach my students using fun sayings,
Yeah. Great.
like the run pony or
Yeah.
great cosmic muffin, like, and then I have them come up with them, and we write a whole paper of like all
Yeah.
the listing all the different rhythms. And whenever we get to a new song, if I see pretty much any measure that has a mix of quarter notes and eighth notes,
Yeah.
I'll ask them like, which rhythm is this, or which one do you want to choose?
Yeah.
Which saying
Yeah.
you want to choose for this
Yeah.
one?
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Yeah. So making things fun is so important. And um, I find a lot of, it's so important for parents to practice along with kids. And the habit that many parents have is to focus on what doesn't work well. Oh, you made that mistake again. Like the kid knows, oftentimes. They know. And it, when the parent focuses on the negative, it can be pretty crushing for the kid. It's like when in a lesson, when the student is playing for you, it's like they're giving you a gift. It's like, hey, here's my little gift for today. And you can think about how when you give a gift, like how do you want somebody to receive it?
Right, you want them to really like it and accept
Yeah.
it. I just keep thinking like the opposite. Like the thing, like thanks, I hate it. Like
Right.
that would
Right.
be awful.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. When you focus on what doesn't work well, that spirit of the gift really gets crushed. And this is not to say that we give up on excellence, but rather an approach to excellence that is based on crushing our students' spirits ain't gonna work so well.
Yeah.
Right? And yet this is like all the horror stories from Russian conservatories, students leaving their lessons in tears. This is kind of what that's about. So, even when, so this is my approach. It's like I, even when, if the student does like 90% of everything wrong, I'll start with pointing out what they did well, and then express some curiosity. Well, did you notice this or that about your sound? And sometimes it's just like it didn't even occur to the kid. And so to begin by like criticizing something that they weren't even trying to do or paying attention to, that can be especially soul crushing. I remember the times of my childhood that I felt most aggrieved were when I knew that I was trying to do something well, and yet somebody came and criticized me for something I didn't even pay attention to.
Hmm.
You know, so yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah, no, I that's a good point. I with my students, I always like to like I point out the positive first, or when I ask them if they play through a piece and I ask them, I always ask them to tell me what they found positive first. Um, sorry, I just lost where I was going. I had it. Hold on. So wait, we were saying
Talking about focusing on what's working well first.
right. Oh, the more so I like the idea of asking them, well, did you realize this, or were you
Yeah,
thinking about this
yeah,
while you were playing,
yeah,
rather than yet just pointing out? Because I'd be interested to see like how often I do that without thinking about it.
yeah. It's very likely that you and your students are paying attention to very different things.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I'll have to after next week, my week's round of lessons.
yeah,
I'll have to update you on what I
yeah.
noticed.
Please do. Yeah, yeah. That the idea of the gift is just so resonant for me these days. Um, when somebody plays for you, it's like they're giving you a gift, and when so here's another thing about teaching. Like one of the most annoying things about teaching is when you discover that your student didn't practice this week. Like, why is that? Why is that so annoying? I think it's because we have gifts as teachers too, and what we offer our students is like a gift each week. And when our students don't honor our gift by taking it in and um, exploring it, working with it, then it's kind of like you bring somebody a nice apple pie and you go over next week and it's just still sitting on the counter where you left it.
We never ate it.
You
Yeah,
never ate it, just sitting
that's a
there.
good analogy too. That would be kind of weird.
It would be kind of weird. It's like, well, what's going on here? Why didn't you eat my apple pie? Are you angry with me? Is it something I said? If you don't like apple pie, just let me know. But because we don't have to do this, right? We don't. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Well, there's a part of me that wants to share with you how I teach playing from the heart. It's very simple. Maybe then maybe we'll wrap up. Um, so you mentioned, I think before we started recording, like having your students tell stories about the songs that they're playing. So that's kind of one way into it. It gets them thinking of the piece as a whole and of the emotional content Is it, that I do have like a sort of niggling critique around that method, though. Not that there's, I mean, I think it's perfectly valid. I use it sometimes too. But for me, it doesn't quite get to playing from the heart in the same way that, oh, just do these dynamics and these articulations in the way like that can also be done mechanically.
Mm.
I could try to manufacture the story through my playing. And, it might be fun. It might be fun to do that. And it's not the same thing as playing from the heart. Playing from the heart is an embodied experience. It's non-conceptual, non-intellectual, not even story-based. We talk about a song telling a story, and it certainly can. Um, but like what you pay attention to while you play, it's not going to be a story because that's a bunch of words and concepts. It's rather the lived experience. What's going on in here? And yet, it's not so easy to teach a kid like how to do that. It's not obvious. You can't just say, "Oh, well, you do these dynamics, and then you're playing from the heart." I mean, it's nice when they do the dynamics, but it can still sound like mechanical. You know,
Right.
you can get the dynamics right, and it still doesn't do anything emotionally. And I have this sort of intellectual, so it's a way of teaching all of this. Um, I could describe all of the various ins and outs of it, but for a little kid, that's just not going to do it. It's got to be immediate, embodied. So here's what I do. I will play their song from the heart. And before I do that, I ask them to notice their own inner audience member while I play. Well, just notice how that makes you feel. Just notice if there's any feelings that come up, or um, if you feel more open or more closed while I play. Um, does it make you want to move in various ways? Like, what's the mood while I play? So that I'll ask those kinds of questions, and then I'll play, listening to my own inner audience member, letting that guide how I play. And then I'll ask the student what they notice. And oftentimes, if it's a little bit hard to put words to it for them. They'll say, "Oh yeah, it felt happy." It's like, "Oh, what kind of happy though?" So like more of a peaceful happy, or more like wee kind of happy. So we have a little dialogue about the feelings that came up. And then I ask them, "Okay, now what I want you to do is to play in such a way where you make yourself feel that way." And the difference is amazing.
So try that this week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like we got to give the student a reference experience, just like with Alexander technique. If I told you to like, okay, let your back widen and lengthen, and you had never had that experience before, you wouldn't have any idea what the hell I'm talking about.
Right.
But if you've come into lessons and you've had that experience, then you kind of know what it's about, what to pay attention to. And if a student doesn't get it, what I'll do then is just play getting the notes right. Dee dee da 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 dee da 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 da. Right? How did you feel while I played that? Were you more open, more closed? I'll ask those kinds of questions, like, "Oh yeah," the student kind of hear the difference. And I'll do bum 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 da 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 dum bum, and like, how do you feel that time when I play that? Like, "Oh yeah, it's like it's more cheerful or something." Okay, now you play in a way where you make yourself feel that way. And afterwards, I'll ask them, "Okay, so how did you do that?" I'll tell them the impact that it had on me. Like, oh, my inner audience member said, or like, I felt X. How did you do that? How did you, play in such a way where I felt like this? And oftentimes they'll go off in other directions, talking about dynamics or something else. It's like, oh, well, you had those things in there. I heard that happening. But what were you thinking about? What were you paying attention to? And I'll have to like guide them back to, oh yeah, I was thinking about the feeling of the song while I was playing. Oh, there it is. All right, so that's your homework this week. How about you pay attention to the feeling of the song while you play this week?
I'm definitely gonna try that. My students, I'm sure I'll get a wide variety of
Yeah, you will.
answers.
You will. Yeah. Yeah, what did that bring up for you?
It's just a good way of explaining it, because like you said, there's these concepts of like uh, the inner audience, and you could make it complicated, but finding a way to make it really simple and easy for a kid to grasp and still have fun with it rather than stare at you like, what?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Other things that you might notice when people play from the heart. You can ask them about this too. Like, what happened in your body? Did you get tighter or freer?
Yeah.
Very almost universally, playing from the heart leads to being more free. Because trying to get it right is this kind of narrow focus.
Right.
Playing from the heart, there's more curiosity and openness there. And another big thing is like, well, did you feel more open or more closed? There was one more. Fun. What was that like for you overall? Did you have more fun that time or was it less fun? Always more fun. Yeah, and that goes back to like how do you get your kids to practice?
You're
It's
leading
got to be
back to
fun.
the how do you have more fun with it
Yeah,
to want to do it.
yeah, yeah, and kids want that feeling of expression and to take music lessons. It's coming, for the kid who wants to be there. It's coming from that place of, oh, I have something I want to express. Like, wow, that would be so much fun to be able to do, and then to encounter, well, you have to play all these scales and get the
Like,
notes right. It's really disappointing. So like no wonder they don't want to practice, or no wonder they, oh,
right.
maybe I'll try piano. Maybe I don't have to, it won't encounter this, in piano. If practicing is boring and painful, like who's surprised that the kid wouldn't want to do it? You wouldn't want to do
Right.
it either. Okay, good.
Some things to try. That's
Yeah.
good.
Oh, good. Anything else?
Not that's jumping out at me at the moment.
Yeah, that seems like plenty
We
enough.
covered a good variety.
Yeah, I touched on a bunch of stuff there. Um, okay, very good. Well, yeah, another fun conversation. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
I'll just stop the recording here.